Thank you, Pete. I'd like to take us through the book of Ruth. Always a favourite of mine. Can everyone hear me properly? Yeah, oh good, good. I'm using various translations and paraphrases and skips. I hope you can follow it. When I read Ruth again recently, it left me in tears and wanting to worship. Now, this is nothing high-powered, it's just rather reflections on the character of these people, their simple obedience, their humility, their joy and their faith. To me, this story feels a bit like the gentle flowing of a river, meandering after a troubled beginning through a certain valley on its way to the sea. A little bit of background. Joshua had taken the children of Israel into the promised land to occupy it. And this is a part of the period between, say, 1500 BC and 1000 BC. His quote from Judges chapter 2, the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who'd seen all the great works of the Lord that he did for Israel. And then they died, and the Lord raised them up judges. And then the Lord was with the judge and delivered them out of the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. But they didn't stay faithful. And in several times in the book of Judges, it says, and this isn't a commendation, it's a severe rebuke. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes, but not the faithful ones in our story. Some of the judges, just to remind you, people like Deborah and Barak, Gideon, Samson, and Samuel. Now, this is the beginning of the book of Ruth, chapter 1. Now, in the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land of Israel, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to stay in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. Now, Moab was a very small nation, neighboring to Israel to the east. Anyway, verse 2, the man's name was Elimelech. His wife was Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. And Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left and her 2 sons. And they took wives of the women of Moab. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. And they dwelt there about 10 years. These 2 people seem not to have been very optimistic. The mother of these 2 lads, the husband of Ruth, Mahlon, his name means sick or sickly. And Orpah's husband's name, Chilion, means pining or failing. So they seem to have had a bit of a dismal view of things. Anyway, in verse 5, and maybe they were right then, Mahlon and Chilion both also died. So Naomi decided to return to her land, the land of Israel, with her daughters-in-law going with her. Verse 8, Naomi said to her daughters-in-law, go back, go to your mother's houses. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with us. The Lord grant you rest, each of you, in the house of her new husband. So she wanted them to remarry. She kissed them, but they cried and they said, no, we will return with you to your people. But Naomi said, turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? I'm too old to have a husband. I can't produce any more sons. And why would you wait anyway? No, my daughters, she said, it grieves me much for your sake that the hand of the Lord is gone out against me. And so they cried again. Orpah kissed her mother and left, but Ruth clung to her. And Naomi was obviously greatly distressed by her losses. But even so, in all of that, we can see just how much she meant to them and how much they'd been affected by her. They loved her dearly. Despite her grief, she must have shown real godly character, and she will have taught them a lot of things about the Lord. So on to verse 15. Naomi said, see, look, she's talking to Ruth now, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. You return after your sister-in-law. Now, you may be familiar with the next bit, but you just have to listen to this. This is a glorious declaration of love. I find it hard to read, I tell you. So verse 16, Ruth said, do not entreat me to leave you or to return from following after you. The way you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Here you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death part you and me. It just takes my breath away. This is a deep commitment, like a marriage vow. She's leaving behind everything she's ever known. Country, customers, family, gods. And she's going to a land that she doesn't know, the foreigner, maybe even an outcast, all for the love of Naomi. And a growing sense of the faithfulness of Naomi's God. So Naomi saw, in verse 18, Naomi saw that she was steadfastly minded to go with her, and she left off speaking to her. So they came to Bethlehem, and all the city was moved about them, and they said, "Is this Naomi?" And she said, "Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. The Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, and the Lord has brought me home empty." Now, a bit of understanding, Naomi, her real name, means my delight or pleasant. But Mara, bitterness. It's the same root as the origin of the name Mary. And there's an example of it in Exodus 15. I'll just read it to you. Moses took the people of Israel and they came to Marah, this special place, and they couldn't drink of the waters because they were too bitter. So God showed Moses a tree and instructed him. He cast the tree into the waters, and the waters were made sweet. What Naomi needed was the same tree, that tree that healed her bitter waters. And I have to ask if she really was empty, or was this just all the uncomfortable preparation of God for the blessings to come? And I can't help thinking that did she but know it, she had a priceless jewel with her. So it says in the last verse, they came to Bethlehem in the beginning of the barley harvest. So on to chapter 2. Now Naomi had a kinsman, a relative of her husband's, a mighty man of wealth, and his name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, "Let me now go to the field and glean ears of corn after someone in whose sight I shall find grace." And Naomi said, "Go, my daughter." I just love the way Ruth defers to Naomi, treating her as though she's her own mother. And she expects somebody to do this. She doesn't know anyone here. A little bit about gleaning. Here it is. This is Moses giving the law to the people. It's Leviticus chapter 23. And he tells the people of Israel how to behave when they've got a harvest coming. When you reap the harvest of your land, you must not reap all the way to the edge of your field or gather the gleanings, the leftovers, after your harvest. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I am the Lord your God. See, God always takes care of people. Even he uses us to do it, but he intends us to have people in mind and not just ourselves. Verse 3, so Ruth went and gleaned in a field after the reapers, picking up the corn that they hadn't collected. And she happened to light on a part of the field belonging to Boaz. And Boaz came out from Bethlehem and said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." And they answered him, "May the Lord bless you." And I don't know if you can hear it, but I hear not just some formula they were using. This sounds real to me, genuine. I'm familiar with Christians in Italy, and there are other parts of the world where they do this as well. They just greet each other with one word, peace. And they mean it too. And I wonder if we haven't lost something here in comfortable England and the West, some parts of the West where there's a mature church. Both Peter and Paul commended something to the early saints. They said, greet one another with a holy kiss. That's 3 times in the New Testament. That's men and women. And we don't do that. We're English. We don't like that sort of thing. Verse 5, Boaz asked his servant, "Whose young woman is this?" The servant answered, "It's the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi. And she asked to glean after the reapers, and so she's continued all day even till now, although she rested a little while in the shelter." So we can see a willing hard worker in Ruth. Then in verse 8, Boaz said to Ruth, "Listen, my daughter, don't go to glean in another field. Remain here close to my maidservants. When you're thirsty, go and drink from the vessels of water that the young men had drawn." And Ruth's response, verse 10, she fell on her face and bowed to the ground. And she said, "Why have I found favor in your sight? Why have you noticed me? And I'm a stranger." But Boaz answered, "I've been told everything that you've done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband." And then he says another wonderful thing. "May a full reward be given you by the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to trust." And how she had come to trust under the wings of the Almighty. What a place of safety they are. And she was finding that out more each day. So she thanks Boaz, calling him my Lord, and she says to him, "You've comforted me, and you've spoken friendly to your handmaid, even though I'm not like one of your handmaidens." I think she's a lovely, humble, grateful attitude she's got. And Lord, make me more like that. Then Boaz invites her to share food and drink with them all at the mealtime and offers her some roasted grain to eat. That evening, when she'd finished and beaten it all out, she'd collected some 40 ephahs. Now, that's around 40 litres, enough to fill a large kitchen bin, which is not a bad day's work for one young woman. She took it all back to Naomi and gave her what she'd kept of the roasted grain from mealtime. And Naomi's grateful too that somebody has regarded her. She asked Ruth where she got it all. And when Ruth told her it was from Boaz's field, verse 20, Naomi said to her, "May he be blessed of the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. The man is a close relative of ours, one of our family redeemers. It's good, my daughter, that you go out with his young maidens, so that nothing befalls you in any other field." So it seems that she might not have been so well received by everyone. Maybe because she was a foreigner, they wouldn't take too kindly to her being there at all, let alone gleaning their own fields and their harvest. So she stayed and gleaned in the same field until harvest time was over. And into chapter 3, Naomi begins to see the hand of God in all this. And some would say it's coincidences, but we don't think so, do we? Not really. So verse 1, Naomi says to Ruth, "My daughter, I'm going to seek rest for you so that it may be well with you. Boaz is our kinsman. Now look, he's going to be winnowing barley tonight in the threshing floor." A bit about threshing and winnowing. When they cut down the grain, it was just as it had been when it was growing. It's not like using a modern combine harvester. It all had to be done by hand. So they went to their threshing floor and used a winnowing tool to separate the grain from the straw. Now, Naomi has formulated her plan. She tells Ruth to go to the threshing floor and hide until the men have finished their work and have eaten and drunk. And she must note where Boaz lies down it's like a barn, I suppose, and goes to sleep. Then Ruth is to go to him quietly, lift the cover off his feet, and lie down next to him. And Boaz will tell her what to do. Now, this is really weird. Definitely not everyday behavior. Probably not anything she'd ever heard of in Moab. Would you do this? I'm not sure I would. But Ruth seems to trust Naomi with her life. So Ruth's response is, "All that you say, I will do." Very simple. And off she goes. Verse 7, when Boaz had eaten and drunk and his heart was merry or good, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of corn. And she came softly and covered his feet and laid down. Now at midnight, the man trembled for some reason and turned and saw a woman lying at his feet. So he asked, "Who are you?" It was dark, of course. That's why he wouldn't know who she was, couldn't recognize her. "I am Ruth," she says in verse 9, "your servant. Take me under your wing, for you're a family redeemer." That is incredibly simple. She's asking him to marry her. that is some request. What a prayer. If only we could be that direct and that trusting when we approach our Redeemer. Now, a little bit of an explanation of what this meant, Redeemer here. The Promised Land was divided up between the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. Families were allocated to towns and villages and eventually to plots of land. And then it was most important that each family retained their inheritance through the generations. They would pass it on to their sons, and it would still be their little part of land, belonging in family forever in their name. And there's a law about it in Deuteronomy 25. In verse 5, if brothers dwell together and one of them dies without children, the widow of the dead mustn't marry a stranger. Her husband's brother shall take her to wife and perform the duty of a husband's brother. And her firstborn will succeed in the name of his dead brother, so that his name is not put out of Israel. All the names must be kept, must be treasured. And I think God does exactly that with ours as well. But it wasn't always a popular idea with the people who were picked upon, the relatives. For example, Judah's first son, died, but his brother Onan refused to raise up a son for him. That's in Genesis 38. So the brother might have to be a cousin or a more distant relative, and he was known as a Goel, or kinsman relative. And our Boaz commends Ruth that she's done the good thing in not just looking for a young man. There are plenty of young men about, but she's waited and she's done as she's told, and she's looked to an older man. He would have been quite a bit older by now. And he promises her in verse 11 that he will do all that she asks. All the people of my city, he says, know that you're a virtuous woman. Now, it's true that I am your near kinsman, but there's a nearer relative than I. So I want you to stay here. If he'll fulfill his responsibility to be your redeemer, then, well, but if he won't redeem you, as the Lord lives, I will. So she lay at his feet until morning and left while it was still dark. These are tremendous things. She got back to Naomi, told her what had happened. And Naomi said this, she knew the character of Boaz. She said, sit still, my daughter, until you know how the matter will fall. For the man will not rest until he's finished the thing this day. Boaz was an honourable man, and Naomi knew it. They've all conducted themselves uprightly, honourably, and righteously. That's how they lived. They didn't know how to do it any other way. Boaz was going to get onto this matter first thing, very promptly, even though it's going to change his life significantly. There's no hesitation, no, oh, let me think about this, I'll let you know later. She was willing to lay down her life, and he was willing to lay down his life. And they were committing themselves to people they really didn't know very well. Another thing, Boaz was inviting some sort of criticism, really, in marrying a foreigner. But I suspect that he started out a little bit less worried about that than some of the other people. Here's another little bit of background. We go back a bit again to Joshua, who took the tribes of Israel across the River Jordan into Canaan. The first city they came to, you will know, was Jericho. He sent 2 men to spy out the city, and they entered a house on Jericho's wall belonging to a harlot called Rahab, who hid them from the men of the city, and in return they agreed to save her when the city was destroyed. So after that, she lived with the Israelites, and we know this from Matthew chapter 1. She married a man from the tribe of Judah named Salmon. They had a son, and that was Boaz. So Rahab was Boaz's mother, and so he was already used to the idea of integrating foreigners into Hebrew life. And so we get to chapter 4. This is the culmination of the story. Boaz went up to the city gate and sat down. The fact that he was happy sitting down in the gate freely like this suggests that he was one of the elders of the city. That's where the elders or the city leaders sat, in the gate. We find reference to that, like the gates of hell will not prevail against Jesus' church. So this is the authorities have no power against him. Now the kinsman redeemer, the one Boaz had spoken of, came by. And Boaz said, "Turn aside, friend, sit down here." And he did. Then he said to the man, "Naomi's selling the land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I'd tell you and say, buy it. But there's no one besides you to redeem it, and I'm after you." So the man said, "I will redeem it." So he's quite happy. If it's just a question of buying the land, he'll do it without hesitation. But, verse 5, then Boaz said, "If you do buy Naomi's field, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance." But then the Redeemer said, "Oh, I can't redeem it for myself, lest I spoil my own inheritance. You take my right of redemption, because I can't redeem it." So again, we see the reluctance to marry a widow who may well produce a son for you, but he will be an heir for your dead relative and not for you. Your firstborn son will inherit land in somebody else's name, not yours. You may have a second son who will inherit your own land, but why take the chance? So verse 9, Boaz said to the elders and all the people, "You're witnesses that I bought from Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech, Kilion, and Mahlon. Also Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate his land in his inheritance, so that it isn't lost." They were all witnesses, and they said this, "May the Lord make the woman who's coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May your house be great because of the seed that the Lord will give you by this young woman." Now that's a prayer and a blessing that God would be pleased to answer. It was his intention all along. This is what he wanted to do. And I really think that in life, and I'm talking about myself very much here as well, we should stop thrashing and fretting whatever's going on around us and simply fix our faith, pin it, our faith and confidence in God, and allow him to work out his own plans for us. It is actually going to be a much more restful place because he sees from the beginning, and he is utterly worthy of our trust. Now here's the last little bit from verse 13. Boaz took Ruth to be his wife, and she bore him a son. Then the women of the town said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who's not left you without a redeemer. May his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be a restorer of life to you and a nourisher of your old age, because your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him." Naomi took the child, laid him on her lap, and became his nurse. And the women gave him a name, the boy, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." And they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now, this story has been Ruth's, a lovely young woman, but it's also been Naomi's story. Ultimately, she got her husband's and her son's, and of course, by implication, her own rights restored. They and Boaz became part of the line of the man after God's own heart, who became King David. And beyond that, of the line of the greater David, our kinsman redeemer, Jesus. So I see this account as something of an oasis in what was often a time of trouble. Like our own lives, it's formed just a small length of that scarlet cord, like the one that Rahab hung out of her window. That cord which ran all the way through the Old Testament, from Eve right up to that other Mara, Mary, arriving at the perfect fulfillment of all God's plans. May we learn to rest in his unfailing and eternal wisdom and love. Amen.